Hey everyone, it's Russell.
And Christine.
So I just found this mobile game everyone's talking about. Royal Match. Gorgeous graphics and super fun puzzles.
Bro, you're late. I'm already at level 700. I play it every day on the subway because it doesn't need Wi-Fi.
Wait, what? I've got to catch up.
Oh, and they just added new mini-games. They make it even more fun and challenging.
Alright, show's over. I'm gonna go play.
Download Royal Match on the App Store or Google Play today.
Experience the magic of the holidays with ice skating at Ice and Lights, the Winter Village at Cameron Run. Just minutes from Old Town Alexandria. Enjoy this fun outdoor family experience for a limited time. At night, explore whimsical light displays, snap selfies, and take a spin on the outdoor ice rink. The Winter Village and evening ice skating are open through December 30th. Through February, enjoy daytime outdoor ice skating, warm hot chocolate, and s'mores. Calendars fill fast, so make plans today. See the schedule and purchase tickets at CameronIceandLights.com.
Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. There are forgotten revolutions in the 20th century. It's very common for us to think of the revolutions that ended the First World War, the Russian and the German revolutions, and the other revolutions that shape Europe in 1918, 1919, and so on and so forth. But there are two that we completely forget about that have equally lasting consequences, if arguably more so. And they predate the First World War, and they are the Turkish or the Ottoman Revolution and the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, the 1911 revolution in China. And they don't fit a kind of a convenient model of war and crisis lead to revolt and overthrow. But they do fit a kind of a slightly different narrative. One that kind of begins with the Meiji Restoration in Japan and is really the kind of the story of Asian and Middle Eastern powers looking at the success, the military and economic successes of Europe and thinking, we're done for if we don't do something. Both the Ottoman and the Qing empires are in terminal decline. The Japanese managed to spare themselves from humiliation and occupation. And today, I think what we're going to do is dive into Eugene Rogan's amazing book, The Fall of the Ottomans. We've looked at this book a little bit before, but to look at the Ottoman Revolution that ends the kind of autocratic power of the Sultan and brings about a fraught and complex transition in 1908 with the Committee of Union and Progress, which came to power in a coup and which would transform the pre-war Ottoman Empire and would shape really the Ottoman Empire's fortunes during the First World War. So as I said, I'm looking at Eugene Rogan's The Fall of the Ottomans. So, Eugene Rogan, the Ottomans had lost territories to European powers. In addition to those surrendered in the Treaty of Berlin, Britain secured Cyprus as a colony in 1878. France occupied Tunisia in 1881. After intervening in Egypt's crisis in 1882, Britain placed that autonomous Ottoman province under British colonial rule. So this is really the fallout from the Russo-Turkish War, which was the product of the Ottoman Empire's suppression of the Bulgarian national uprising in horrific and brutal fashion. These losses seemed to convince Sultan Abdul Hamid II that he needed to rule the Ottoman Empire with a strong hand in order to protect it from further dismemberment by ambitious European powers. To his credit, between 1882 and 1908, Abdul Hamid protected Ottoman domains from further dismemberment. Yet the territorial integrity of the state was preserved at the expense of its citizens' political rights. Abdul Hamid's autocratic style of rule eventually gave rise to an increasingly organized opposition movement. The Young Turks were a disparate coalition of parties bound by common goals of constraining Abdul Hamid's absolutism, restoring constitutional rule, and returning to parliamentary democracy. Amongst those prominent parties under the Young Turk umbrella was the Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, a secret society of civilians and military men founded in the early 1900s. Now, of course, we need to take a bit of a rewind and look at the constitutional settlement that had emerged in the 19th century in the Ottoman Empire. So the despotism of Abdul Hamid had been preceded by constitutional rule. By constitutional, I mean that there had been limits on the power of the Sultan. This constitution had been established in 1876 and was the result of the what Gladstone referred to as the Bulgarian outrages, and the power of the Sultan was constrained by a coalition of liberal-minded ministers. And normally when that happens, normally when the power of anybody is constrained in that manner, it means that the power was kind of on the wane anyway. So, back to the question of the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress. Though the CUP had branches in all parts of the Ottoman Empire, the Arab lands, Turkish provinces, and the Balkans, the movement had faced most repression in the Turkish and Arab provinces. By 1908, the CUP's centre of operations lay in the surviving Ottoman possessions in the Balkans, in Albania, Macedonia, and Thrace. In June 1908, spies working for the Sultan uncovered a CUP cell in the Ottoman Third Army in Macedonia. Faced with imminent court-martial, the military men decided to take action. On the 3rd of July 1908, a CUP cell leader named Adjutant Major Ahmed Niazi led 200 well-armed soldiers and their civilian supporters in revolt, demanding that the Sultan restore the 1876 constitution. They all fully expected to die in the attempt. However, the rebels captured the public's mood, and their movement gained momentum as it drew increasing support from the population at large. Whole cities in Macedonia rose in rebellion and declared their adherence to the constitution. A young Turk officer named Major Ismail Enver, who later rose to fame as just as Enver, proclaimed the constitution in the Macedonian towns of Koprulu and Tikvaish to popular acclaim. The Ottoman Third Army threatened to march on Istanbul to impose the constitution in the empire's capital. 3 weeks on, the revolutionary movement had grown so big that the Sultan could no longer count on the loyalty of his military to contain the uprising in Macedonia. So there are, just as with February 1917, there are these military tipping points where all of a sudden the autocrat realizes his sole tool for finally imposing his rule has slipped out of his grasp. And the Tsar Nicholas II and Abdul Hamid both contemplated all sorts of extremely bloody remedies to this threat to their power. and in both cases were unable to action those. Fortunately, Eugene Rogan writes. 3 weeks on, the revolutionary movement had grown so big that the Sultan could no longer count on the loyalty of his military to contain the uprising in Macedonia. This was the emergency that drove the Sultan to convene his cabinet on the 23rd of July. They met in Yildiz Palace, perched on a hill overlooking the Bosphorus Straits on the European side of Istanbul. Intimidated by the 65-year-old Sultan, the ministers avoided raising the crucial question of restoring constitutional rule. They spent hours deliberating whom to blame rather than addressing the necessary solution to the crisis. After a day spent listening to the opinions of his ministers, Abdul Hamid brought the discussion to a close. "I will follow the current," he announced to his cabinet. "The constitution was first promulgated under my reign. I am the one who established it. For reasons of necessity, it was suspended. I now wish for the ministers to prepare a proclamation restoring the constitution." The relieved ministers acted immediately on the Sultan's instructions and dispatched telegrams to all of the provinces of the empire to announce the dawn of a second constitutional era. For their success in forcing the Sultan to restore the constitution, the Young Turks were credited with having waged a revolution. It took a moment for the significance of the events to sink in. The newspapers ran the story without banner headlines and with no commentary. "Parliament has been reconvened in conformation with the terms of the Constitution by order of His Imperial Majesty." Perhaps it was a reflection on how few people bothered to read the heavily censored Ottoman press that it took a full 24 hours before the public reacted to the news. On the 24th of July, crowds gathered in the public spaces of Istanbul and provincial towns and cities across the empire to celebrate the return of constitutional life. Major Enver rode the train to Salonika, in modern Greece, the centre of a Young Turk movement, where the jubilant crowds greeted him as champion of freedom. On the platform to greet Enver were his colleagues Major Ahmet Kemal, military inspector of the Ottoman railways, and Mehmed Talat, a postal clerk. Both had risen through the hierarchy of the CUP. Unlike Enver, they came to be known by their middle names, Kemal and Talat. Enver, they cheered, "You are now Napoleon." That's an interesting kind of way in which Enver is envisaged.
Hey everyone, it's Russell.
And Christine.
So I just found this mobile game everyone's talking about. Royal Match. Gorgeous graphics and super fun puzzles.
Bro, you're late. I'm already at level 700. I play it every day on the subway because it doesn't need Wi-Fi.
Wait, what? I've got to catch up.
Oh, and they just added new mini-games. They make it even more fun and challenging.
Alright, show's over. I'm gonna go play.
Download Royal Match on the App Store or Google Play today.
Meta is investing $600 billion in AI infrastructure, bringing jobs to communities across America. Phil, a Meta building engineer in Las Lunas, New Mexico, says,
"Welcoming Meta into our community is creating more opportunities."
Learn more at meta.com/buildingamerica.
Over the following days, red and white banners emblazoned with the revolutionary slogans "Justice, Equality and Fraternity" festooned the streets. Photographs of Niazi, Enver, and the military's other freedom heroes were posted in town squares across the empire. Political activists gave public orations about the blessings of the Constitution, sharing their hopes and aspirations with the general public. Now, what I find interesting here is the widespread popularity of a return to constitutional rule. Often when you have these kind of constitutional revolutions, it's like a small faction of the bourgeoisie who like rules. They like rules because they're good for business, and they like rules because they help to order a society in their favour. When you have a tyrant, a despotic autocrat, the autocrat rarely rules in the interests of the middling sort. They often try to look after the nobility and sometimes reach out to the poor, the kind of the peasantry, in order to have that kind of popular touch. But it's often the middling sorts that get overlooked. And constitutional rule, limits to executive power, the rule of law, and the codification of law, so that things like business can function. These are the sorts of things like the middling sorts, the bourgeoisie, in any kind of ancien regime rather like. So the fact that towns and cities are, full to overflowing with masses of cheering crowds indicates that something slightly different is at play here. That the constitutional rule was far more widely sought after than just from a faction of the middle classes, and that there was the wider population, and in this empire that's really on its last legs, that has been squeezed and is close to collapse in the first decade of the 20th century, that there is this kind of widespread popular adulation and rejoicing at the prospect of a kind of constitutional society re-emerging itself. And it may well be that the 1876 constitution that briefly existed had produced some results. It may well be also that the experience of those decades of despotism, of autocratic rule, had been rife with disaster. Well, and Abdul Hamid had not done a terrible job. He'd actually sort of stemmed the kind of the tide of national humiliation that the Ottoman Empire was facing. Eugene Rogan offers a kind of an explanation. The hopes raised by the constitutional revolution drew together all parts of the diverse Ottoman population in a moment of shared patriotism. Ottoman society comprised of a wide range of ethnic groups, including Turks, Armenians, Arabs, and Kurds, as well as many different faith communities, from the Sunni majority and the Shiite Muslims to over a dozen different Christian denominations and a sizable Jewish communities. Past attempts by the government to foster an Ottoman national identity had foundered on this diversity until the constitutional revolution. As one political activist wrote, the Arabs embraced the Turks wholeheartedly, in a belief that they were no longer Arabs or Turks or Armenians or Kurds in the state, but that everyone had become an Ottoman with equal rights and responsibilities. And this is the power of constitutional revolutions, that they create a sense of citizenship and a sense of national citizenship, and therefore a sense of a nation. And therefore constitutional revolutions can become nationalist revolutions. There are all sorts of nationalist kind of convulsions in revolutionary France, whence people realize that they have, to some degree, participation in the life of the nation. Therefore, France is us and we are France, and to be part of France, to be French at all, one has to be in favor of the revolution. And if one is not, then one is not participating in the idea of the nation as we understand it, as it is popularly understood. And this kind of, it's interesting, it cuts both ways. In Jonathan Schneer's book on the Balfour Declaration, he writes about the antipathy that Sharif Hussein of Mecca had towards the CUP. And then during the war, he was sympathetic towards the British and their offer of autonomy. It's obviously a complete deception. Their offer of autonomy for the Arabs, if the Arabs joined them against the Turks in an Arab revolt. Now, it looks, a close reading of it suggests that it's not that Sharif Hussein said, we want to throw off the mantle of, Turkish tyranny and to embrace our national destiny. That's not the reason, his motivation for the Arab revolt. He said, we have these secular modernizers in Turkey, the CUP, who are these are kind of enemies of the faith. These are kind of people who are apostates, and we must kind of get rid of them. So part of the motivation for the Arab revolt came from a rejection of the modernity that the Turks were embracing. But for the most part, national identity is kind of being forged in these moments, and a kind of an imperial national identity.
Ever find yourself bored or trying to kill time? We have finally found a solution for you. Royal Match. Don't believe me? Let's hear what people say.
Royal Match is such a fun puzzle game. There are over 10,000 levels, also a bunch of mini-games, which makes it super exciting.
My favorite part? It doesn't need Wi-Fi. I play on my commute, on flights, even while waiting in line.
And honestly, no ads, not a single one. That's why I'm so into it.
So there you have it, a relaxing, challenging, totally ad-free game that goes wherever you go. Download Royal Match and see why everyone loves it.
Holidays bring feasting, fluffy dinner rolls, tasty stuffing, and your family's French toast bakes. With Hero Bread, indulge in your holiday favorites, made with Hero Bread sliced bread loaves, bagels, croissants, buttermilk biscuits, and more. And don't forget their Hero Hawaiian rolls. With 4 grams of protein and 0 grams net carbs, Hero Bread has you covered with 0 to 5 grams net carb and high fiber options, so your holidays stay delicious and balanced. Like their 3 grams net carb pan au chocolat. Hero Bread is offering 10% off your order. Go to hero.co and use code FALL25 at checkout. That's FALL25 at hero.co. All figures are per serving of Hero Bread. Contains up to 17 grams of fat per serving. See the product nutrition panels on hero.co for more information.
And that itself is really, really fascinating. The joyful celebrations of newfound freedoms were marred by acts of retaliation against those suspected of taking part in Abdul Hamid's repressive apparatus. The Ottoman Empire under the Sultan had degenerated into a police state. Political activists were imprisoned and exiled, newspapers and magazines were heavily censored, and citizens looked over their shoulders before speaking, fearful of the ubiquitous spies working for the government. Mohammed Izzet Darwaza, a native of the Palestinian hill town of Nablus, described the explosion of resentments in the first days of the revolution against those government officials, great and small, known to be a spy or a corrupt oppressive. Yet, for most people, the Young Turk Revolution inspired a newfound sense of hope and freedom that was nothing short of intoxicating. The joys of the moment were captured in verse, as poets from across the Arab and Turkish lands composed odes to celebrating the Young Turks and their revolution. Today we rejoice in liberties, thanks to you. We go forth in the morning and return in the evening without concern or strain. The free man has been set loose from prison where he was demeaned, and the beloved exile has returned to the homeland. For there are no spies whose slander he need fear, and no newspapers we need fear to touch. We sleep at night with no dreams that cause us anxiety, and yet we rise in the morning without dread or fear. What this revolution was not was a social revolution. So different social classes or groupings did not wind up seizing power. This was a business as usual kind of palace coup, a constitutional revolution. The mildest of pressure is placed upon the Sultan, and he reverts to a solution that saves him. Eugene Rogan writes, yet the revolution that raised so many hopes did not led only to disillusionment. Those who had hoped for political transformation were disappointed when the revolution produced no major changes in the government of the Ottoman Empire. The CUP decided to leave Sultan Abdul Hamid II on the throne. He had managed to take some credit for the restoration of the constitution and was revered by the Ottoman masses as both the Sultan and the Caliph, or spiritual head of the Muslim world. Deposing Abdul Hamid might have generated more problems than benefits for the Young Turks in 1908. Moreover, the CUP's leaders were indeed Young Turks. most junior officers and low-ranking bureaucrats in their junior officers and low-ranking bureaucrats in their late 20s and 30s, they lacked the confidence to take power into their own hands. Instead, they left the exercise of government to the Grand Vizier or Prime Minister Said Pasha and his cabinet, and took on the role of oversight committee to ensure the Sultan and his government upheld the constitution. If Ottoman citizens believed the constitution would solve their economic problems, they were soon to be disappointed. The political instability provoked by the revolution undermined confidence in the Turkish currency. Inflation soared to 20% in August and September 1908, putting the working classes under intense pressure. Ottoman workers organized demonstrations seeking better pay and work conditions, but the treasury was in no position to meet the workers' legitimate demands. Labour activists mounted over 100 strikes in the first 6 months of the revolution, leading to severe laws and government crackdowns on workers. And this is, again, an interesting parallel with Russia is the powerlessness of the provisional government to really deal with any of the inherited problems that it took on from the Tsarist Ancien regime. This government, the CUP, it doesn't even become the government. The CUP leaves all the structures of government in place and naively assumes that two things. Firstly, that the constitution will remain, and secondly, that the constitution itself is the solution to Turkey's problems of national decline and the economic crises that come with that. And alone, it's not. If you look to the example of Lenin and Trotsky and their kind of skepticism of the existing structures of power, they said, you cannot simply seize power and then expect for nothing to happen. Political revolution must be followed by social revolution, by class war, or you wind up with essentially the same system that does the same thing. And you whatever that you are, you're not a revolutionary if you do that. So I'm going to return to that again pretty soon, but I do find it interesting that we don't look upon 1908 in Turkey with as much scrutiny as we do 1917 in Russia. But really, it is an integral part of a process that transforms the Middle East by the end of the First World War, the first years of the 1920s, in as radical a way as Russia itself was transformed. Anyway, I'll catch you on the next podcast, and we'll be doing another review of the year, probably Monday. Take care, folks. All the best. Bye-bye.
They say if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. At Amica Insurance, we're built for our customers and prioritize your needs. Amica, empathy is our best policy. Visit amica.com and get a quote today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show, and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.